of July, which is a big celebration Islamiki in Paris. I had been walking through the Saint-Germain area and came across this very tall, handsome American who, in the most diabolical French, said to me, sort of, "Excusez-moi, monsieur, mais je suis perdu." And I thought, well, Purdue is a university in Illinois or somewhere. And so, okay. So I said to him, "I speak a little English." And so we had a little laugh about that, and I got him back to where he needed to go. And he said, "I would like to meet you again." And I said, "Well, I have a very strange life because I'm in, quote, show business, and my hours are different, and I sleep differently, and we have rehearsals." And so in Paris in those days, you didn't have telephone. I mean, you know, when you think of communication now, everybody has their bits and their bobs, and they tweet and they twiddle and they do all sorts of things. Well, having a telephone in Paris was a luxury. It took 7 years of a waiting list to get a telephone. So the only way you could communicate was by writing, and my writing is not very good for a variety of reasons. Anywho, we kept in contact, and Don managed to get me out to lunch a few times, and I have to say, gradually a romance built, and it was very strange and very erotic because Don was 40 and I wasn't quite 20 in those days. And I had a sense, because he shared with me a little bit about his feelings and his awareness of Barbara, but not very much. And we did one thing which I have to share. I've never shared this in public ever before with anybody. We had the most peculiar relationship. We did not have sex. I used to go to sleep with him cuddling me in my little funny room, which is what you had in Paris in those days. You had a little room and a bathroom down the hall, and you were in paradise. I mean, this was wonderful. And Don said to me one day, it was the most amazing compliment that he'd ever been given emotionally, that I felt comfortable just to go to sleep in his presence. So, yeah, this is the first, ladies and gentlemen, ta-da! And it really was totally and utterly amazing. It was unbelievable. There wasn't a sexual component to our relationship at that point. And there's a part of Don, and this is absolutely connected with Barbara, so I'm not just chuntering on. There's a part of Don which is very generous and very sweet, and there's a part of him that was very hard and very didactic. And for example, he took me to the Meherazad Hotel, which is where he stayed because that's where his company put him up, and took me to dinner there. Well, I was a rather naive 18-year-old. And when I say I mean, you know, nowadays, I work with 18-year-olds in my practice in London. They have far more knowledge than I did when I was 18. And I think, oh my God, you know, the pressures of 18-year-olds today is horrendous. At any rate, here I am in this absolutely extraordinary restaurant, and there's Salvador Dali sitting there, and Don is peeling his artichoke in the way that only Don could do. There was some very creative elements with Don. And it was just unbelievable. And so finally we got to the point, and Don said, "I don't want to continue like this. I'm going to be moved to Holland. I'm going to set up an office. Will you come and live with me? And we'll sort of give you a job like a secretary or something, or a filing clerk, so that, you know." And so I went into the theatre, and I went into the cabarets, and I said, "I ain't going to be dancing no more, guys and gals. I ain't going to be doing the puppet show anymore." And everybody got very upset, or very angry, or very delighted. And one nasty foggy day in Paris, I got on this funny train that they used to have, and wandered off to The Hague. And Don had rented this extraordinary house by a canal, which had belonged to one of the Queen Wilhelmina's sisters. It was their boating house. And it was enormous. Now, Holland is a country of tiny houses and tiny apartment buildings, and to have this big house on a canal. And Don, with his beginning style, had hired a Swedish woman and her Italian husband to run the household for him. And it was absolutely a complete and utter nightmare, because I'm used to being up all night, and my idea of breakfast was 6 o'clock in the morning when we'd all finished work and we'd taken off all our makeup and we'd showered, or had what we used to call a whore's bath, which means you took a sponge and washed yourself down as fast as you could with a bowl. And we were out and having spaghetti, and that was our breakfast. And so here I am with Don, who is an absolute classic American. He wants his bacon and eggs, he wants his toast, he wants his coffee, and above all, he wants his orange juice. Well, orange juice didn't exist in Europe as it does now. It was really very funny. And trying to turn night into day, and Don wanted me to go back to school. And so I went back and I was accepted, luckily, wonderful lady, Mrs. Donaldson, who was in charge of the English school in The Hague, which was the diplomatic school, accepted me, and I started studying for what were then called Oxcam exams, and also for exams to entrance into American universities. And this was a pattern, and again, this is very relevant, and I want you to hear it, please. When I arrived in The Hague, of course Don wasn't there, and every single time there was a major event in our lives, Don was not there. And this became a pattern which ended up being horrendously destructive. And that's a really important piece to establish once and for all. So, in this house, which was furnished, however, it was covered with wonderful photos of this strange man. And he had a beatific smile, and he had stunning hands, and Don had said really nothing much about this man called Meherazad. And so suddenly here I am, and I'm sort of thinking, is Don a nutcase? Have I got myself into something very strange here? And remember, I'm talking about 52 years ago. We didn't have TV, we didn't have DVDs, we didn't have CDs, we didn't have any of these things, so there was nothing for me to reference. And you couldn't go to the library. And the first Christmas I was there, Ivy Deuce, Meherazad Deuce, and her husband Terry came on their way to Saudi Arabia because Terry was very involved with the king and had a very powerful relationship with him. And so I met Ivy Deuce for the first time. And we walked into the Vitterbrook Hotel, and there was this white bed and this woman who has the same type of infection that I've had this time here. And I just thought she was gorgeous. And the only thing I could connect her with was Barbara. I thought, this is somebody who somehow, but I couldn't put it into words because I didn't know what it was. And so I continued with school, getting myself organized, helping Don to run the house. Gunnar and Mario left, and we had a Dutch couple come in and take care of the house, and she had a child from a previous relationship. And it was very, very strange. And Don never, ever proselytized about Barbara to me. Not once. And I admire him immensely for that. And I was just talking a little while ago with Mickey, and one of the things I wanted to do when I left here was I wanted to have T-shirts with Barbara's name on and caps with Barbara's name on, and Barbara had taught me a lesson which I'll share in a minute. Okay, so suddenly one day Don comes in and says, I've just had a letter from India, and in it is a letter for you from Meherazad, written by his sister, and the letter was basically inviting me to come to India. Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't have been more shocked. Now, why would this extraordinary man, as he came to be for me, want me to come to India? I'm living with Don, who's a man, and I'm a man too, I hope and think. And what is this all about? So suddenly the little light goes flash, 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 flash. And I said to myself, of course, I can save Don because this is obviously not appropriate. This is why I'm being invited. So my little mind, not heart, mind is going click, 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 click. Okay, I'll go. Now, I've told in the past, and I'm not going to tell today because it just takes forever, the absolutely monumental disasters that were set in front of Don and I coming to India to be with Barbara were extraordinary. I spent 6 days going up and down the Champs-Élysées. No computers, no tweeting, no twitting, changing the tickets because Don's business, and Don, I really want to state this, was a superb businessman. He was extraordinary. It's a part of Don's life that for some reason nobody ever deals with. And yet he couldn't have been the person he was spiritually if he hadn't had that. He was incredible. He was an asset to Standard Oil California like you wouldn't believe. He was brilliant, and he was diplomatic, and I got involved later on in a lot of his work, meeting lots of people, and it was stunning to watch this man at work. And later on, when I was wiser, heart had opened, I really could see how Baba worked through people, and it was a fabulous gift. But Don was a brilliant, brilliant businessman. And here we are in Paris, and every day there's a cancellation. Now, today, any of us could go to the airport in Bombay. We could get a flight anywhere. In fact, we could get several flights anywhere. In fact, if we wanted to go to London, there are 19 flights a day from Bombay. Then, there used to be 2 or 3 a week. And it was unbelievable. So finally, we get to leave. We get to Rome, and they find out Don's an American citizen. Oh my God, we're on TWA. Don can't go because we're going to go to Saudi Arabia, and he doesn't have a visa. Now, for some reason, the Brits didn't. I had a British passport then. Didn't need a visa, so we get hauled off the plane, and guess what? Same routine again, to the airline offices, and finally we get on a flight which takes us to Karachi. And again, I'm missing out lots of details. It was very funny. We get to Karachi, I come through, I come out, no Don. He's an American citizen. He doesn't have a visa for Karachi. I have to go back in. I have to give my passport as security to get Don into Karachi. We then have to find a flight to India. Anyway, we finally get there. Meherazad is so cross, he's absolutely beside himself, because he's come down with the blue DeSoto, and think of what an honor that was to ride in that blue DeSoto. I mean, that to me, now when I think about it, I almost shudder. But, you know, I hopped into it. And we arrived at a big reception for Don at the airport, and we drove up to Pune. We stayed in the Napier Hotel, and this is where the story really begins. The next morning, we got up very early. We had the most awful porridge I've ever eaten in my entire life. I'll never forget it. I mean, it was so bad. I thought, ooh, this is like Dickens porridge. May I have some more, sir? And we got here, and I got out of the car, and nobody said anything. No one, Meherazad, nobody said, do this, do that, go here, go there. And I just walked across, and the doors were open. I'm going to have to brace myself. And I walked toward the door, and I didn't know what I was doing. And the sun was like it was when I came this morning. And Baba walked through that door. As I came through that door, and I fell on the floor in tears. And I sobbed. And Baba walked up to me, and he picked me up, and he just held me. And I can't put it into words. I hope you get some sense of what it was like. Baba picked me up off the floor. Baba was handicapped. Baba couldn't walk. Luckily, I'm not fat like I am now. I was a tiny, skinny thing because that's what dancers were in those days, right? And it was incredible. And I didn't know whether I was coming or whether I was going, whether it was nighttime, whether it was daytime. And Baba just patted my head and held my heart, and then he sat in the chair. And I had no idea what to do. No one had ever said anything what to do. And Baba made me sit right where the little table is. And the whole time I was here, if I ever deviated a nano inch, Baba made sure I was right there. Now, really try and imagine what it was like, because I really didn't know that much about Baba. Yes, I'd seen the books, and yes, I'd seen the photographs. And the one thing which is my Bible with Baba is Sparks. Sparks to me is the truest form of Baba that there is, because it's simple, it's elegant, it's stylish, and it gives you all the answers. Everything you could possibly need from Baba is in Sparks, in my opinion. And everything I'm saying today is my opinion. Let's be clear on that. So there I sat, and all sorts of things took place, and Don gave the presents, and Don got his hugs, and the Mandalay were there, and the men were coming in and out and hugging Don, and at one point Don went out, and Mani was there, and it was like a maelstrom. And the piece that comes clearer, maybe this is age, enjoy age, it's wonderful, is everything was rainbow-like. Everything was coloured. Everything had textures. It was extraordinary. And to sit there, and Baba would be, again, my terminology, talking. And Erich would be translating, and things would be going on, and he'd suddenly stop and go. And I think, oh my God, what have I done wrong? Good old Western ways of guilt. Good old Western ways of guilt. And then he'd just smile and he'd touch his heart. And then we had a whole dialogue because I had an allergy. Are you ready for this one? Curry. And it really, and onions. I could not eat onions and I could not eat curry. Now, can you imagine coming to India and not eating onions and not eating curry? Is that ridiculous, or is that ridiculous? And suddenly in the middle of this, and we had got here very, very early, Baba claps his hands, and obviously Erich and others knew what to do, and everybody stood up, so I stood up. And so Baba took my arm, marched me round the corner, just a little bit down there, and that was where the chapati lady sat. She made chapatis for everybody. And Baba had made these real heavy, old-fashioned chapatis, which a lot of ghee and a lot of sugar went into, and he stood there and made me eat them. Now, again, it on one hand it sounds kind of silly, but it's so profound and so extraordinary that Baba was giving me this extraordinary gift of understanding food and what food plays in our lives. And the first 2 nights we were here, we stayed in Dr. Duncan's cottage. And the second morning, and again, hear this one, please, it's so important. Baba was the most extraordinary, caring host. And we came in and we got out of the car and came in and sat down, and Baba stopped whatever he was doing and immediately turned and said, now, did you eat breakfast? Have you been to the bathroom? Did you sleep well? Was there anything you need? Were you warm enough? Did you have tea? And went through it very, very carefully. And if you hesitated, Baba would say, okay, what did you not do? And what happened? And so you just felt absolutely cosseted in the most beautiful way possible. And Baba said to me 3 times that particular day, is anything bothering you? And I said, no, Baba, why should anything bother me? And, you know, I'm absolutely blissed out. Thank God I'd never taken drugs and never needed drugs, luckily, but I was blissed out on Baba, so I was just higher than a kite, and why would anything bother me? And at the 3rd time that he asked me that, I said, well, yeah, Baba, there is something that bothers me. And you should have seen his eyes. It was like, I knew it. I knew it. Something was going on here. And so I said, Baba, it's going to sound very foolish. And Baba said, no, you tell me. And he made everybody stop what they were doing, writing and talking. And he said, now I want you to listen to what Alain has to say. And so I said, Baba, the one thing I'm worried about here is I'm terrified of snakes. And I'm terrified of meeting a snake. And Baba went. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? I mean, how does that help? The budding psychologist at work. So we get through the afternoon, and we would sometimes have supper here. There used to be like a little terrace there. And when we'd had supper, we went back to Dr. Duncan's cottage. And as one won't, when one travels, in the middle of the night, I had to go and answer a call of nature. And I went outside, and I heard this rustle, and I didn't take any notice whatsoever. And I looked down, and there were 2 little beady eyes and this black thing sitting there, and I thought, oh, that's a snake. And I thought, how nice. And I looked at the snake, and the snake looked up to me, and I looked back at the snake, and I continued doing what comes naturally, as they say in America. And I went back in, and I went back to bed. And we walked in the next morning, and Baba said, did you sleep well? Have you been to the bathroom? Have you had breakfast? Have you had tea? Has anything happened? And I said, no, Baba, nothing has happened. And Baba says, has anything happened? No, Baba. Oh, Baba! And so I told him about the snake. Well, of course, now my terminology again, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, he laughed. He was amused. It brought this wonderful smile that Baba, and Baba had the most extraordinary smile, which to me was a laugh. It was just unbelievable. So I thought, okay, we got that one out of the way. I don't know what that's all about, but that's what it's all about. And that was the day we moved, and we moved across there. And Baba told us, if I ring my bell, doesn't matter what you're doing, you put on your clothes and you come immediately. If it's in the middle of the night, the middle of the day, if you're in the bathroom, doesn't matter what you do, you come as fast as you can, you come running. And living over there was just extraordinary. Now, there was a dog called Peter, a very famous dog called Peter. And Peter and I had a love affair. We could gaze into each other's eyes like two silly kids for what would be not hours, but a long time. And Money every so often would come to look for Peter. And this was sort of our little joke, was if she couldn't find Peter, she knew he was with Alain. So that was my beginning contact with. And so Baba would come out at lunchtime, and he'd put his finger in the food that I would be eating. And he would ask me what I wanted for lunch. Well, again, stupid, no television, no DVDs. I would say, oh, Baba, I'd love some fish. Never thinking, oh, wait a minute, in Ahmednagar, how do you get fish in Ahmednagar, right? Why would I think about it? Not part of my thing. So I would have fish, and Baba would come out and put his finger in, and then, yes, good. And it was extraordinary the way one was looked after. One of the things that Baba loved to do was he played this mad card game. And this wasn't carpeted then, this was all rushes. This was all like coconut matting. It was very uncomfortable. But we would all kneel in front of Baba and play this card game. And I just couldn't, I can't play cards at any rate, but I couldn't get this game at all. And Baba would go, and I'd have to show him my hand. And I think, oh good, finally I'm going to win, this is it, hooray, my number's up. And every so often I would win, and I would say, great, because when you lost, you got to bow down to Baba and he'd rub your nose on the rushes. So here I am, I've got the winning hand, this is it, wonderful, what do I get? Cookie, sweet, something nice? No, I get double the rub of your nose in the ash. And it was extraordinary. Excuse me, I never, ever got the hang of that game, ever. We played it every day. Another thing that Baba loved was to take everybody outside and play 7 tiles. Now, when I was a child, I was badly abused by my father, and I had brain damage, and I have very poor eye-hand coordination. I can just knit, and I can do a little bit of embroidery, but eye-hand and writing is terrible. And we would go outside, and Baba would choose up the teams and everybody, and I would always be the last one that would be chosen, because they figured out in 2 goes that I could not throw a ball at tiles and hit. And so Baba would be sitting there in his chair, and he'd beckon me over, and I'd go over, and he'd bang me on the elbow, and I'd go out. Every ball I threw, bingo, the tiles flew everywhere. And then he'd go, and he'd tap my elbow again, and then the next go, the ball would miss the tiles. So everybody was very confused as to whether I could play or couldn't. It was great fun, believe me. Life with Baba was not all fun and games. It was very serious. I was very, very privileged to sit on discussions of the discourses, of Baba's writing and of Baba's work. And again, I have to say to you, I had no idea what he was talking about. It was, we're talking about, no, I just don't get this. And Baba every so often would stop and say, right, Alain's bored, let's go get him a chapati. And he literally would say, I was bored. And I think, oh my God, this is terrible. You know, here are all these wonderful sages sitting around Baba and all these wonderful things taking place. Excuse me, I've got to stop for a second. The dust of Naga strikes. And so we get through that piece and things will continue. And then one day, a man called Harry Delchard arrived from New York, and he was a merchant seaman. Oh, thank you very much. Very kind. Oi. Will it come out? Yes. Perfect. And he rang the bell, and Eric went with Kaka to see who it was. And he came back and brought in Harry. And Harry had 2 enormous suitcases with him. I knelt down to Baba, and Baba hugged him and said, you know, I'm in seclusion, but I'll see you. And so I'm looking at these 2 suitcases thinking, what are you doing bringing 2 suitcases to Baba? And Baba, of course, picked up on my curiosity and said, okay, let's open the suitcases. And he opened one suitcase, and there were cartons and cartons and cartons of cigarettes. And, I mean, this was long before we thought of smoking as being dangerous, and everybody smoked, and many of them handily smoked. And I must have let out some sort of sound. I must have gone, oh, you know, oh my God, or whatever. And Baba turned to me and he said, do you smoke? And I said, yes, Baba, occasionally. So he said, out of all these, which do you smoke? And I said, well, I smoke Salem. And he took out the carton, hit me on the head with it, and said, you can smoke 5 cigarettes a day, but no more. Incredible, extraordinary, what a learning process. And it took years before what he'd done sunk in. I mean, it was practical, it was appropriate, it was a learning process. Everything was moving, everything was amazing, everything was extraordinary. But one of the things that happened that was the most moving was that they brought lepers. Now, leprosy in India is virtually finished. There is very little leprosy left, which is, I think, a triumph for the Indian nation as a whole, for the Indian government, and all the NGOs that have worked so hard. It has been something so powerful. But in those days, there were still lots and lots of lepers, and they really were. I work as a volunteer in a clinic in Calcutta, and we still have a clinic for lepers. And we have to have it on the banks of the Ganges, and we have to build it every day and just take it down every night, because if the neighbors find out we have lepers, they will come and attack us. And so it all has to be built every morning, all the medicine taken. And there are very, very few left, but there's still some. And these trucks, lorries came with the lepers. And it was totally and utterly amazing to see them. And Baba had me hold the umbrella over him while he was bowing down and giving prasad to the lepers. Can anybody here imagine what it would be like to be a stupid, naive 20-year-old who's still not really sure why he's here, holding holding an umbrella protecting Baba? I mean, nowadays I almost shudder when I think of the responsibility that I was given at that moment in time. But you know, I just and I remember at one point my arm had frozen in position, and Baba stopped what he was doing, touched my arm, unfroze it, and went right back. And he was in, for me, an almost trance-like stage. That's the only way I can describe it. It was totally unbelievable. It was magic to watch these incredible souls. And Baba, at one point, Erich was right behind him, turned to me and said, these are beautiful birds in ugly cages. And this was to be a segue for me into what was going to happen in my life. One day, I had time in here with Erich, Baba, and Don. And Baba said to me, what do you want to do with your life? What is your life going to be? And I had been warned that this was liable to be a question. And so I said, Barbara, I love the concept of interior design, how we use space. I love languages and travel, and at that point I spoke 7, and I'm interested in people. And Barbara took maybe a nanosecond, maybe a little less, and just turned to me and said, psychology. And I thought, psychology? What psychology? What psychology? And he went on to explain very clearly, very concisely, that psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry had not evolved in the way that he felt it should. And it would have to be changed, and that was the area I would have to go into, and I would be one of the people to facilitate that change. It will be very difficult, it will be very hard, it will be very challenging, but he would always be with me. And he repeated it 3 times. I will always be with you. No matter what happens, I will be there for you. And I must admit that I really wasn't quite sure what it meant to, A, for him to be with me, and B, what it was going to be psychologist. And so the conversation actually lasted for about an hour and a half. One day, Barbara called me in, and to me this sounds odd, but you really got very fast the sense of Barbara's fingers working, of his gestures, of how he touched his body. And one could do very limited interaction conversation. And it was just Barbara and myself for a few minutes. And Barbara would gesture, and I'd try and get it, and he would take me through so I could get as close as possible to getting it. And it was just an extraordinary moment. We must have been, at the very maximum, 5 minutes alone in here. But watching his face as I would try and interpret the simple gestures he used, and you see my hand is almost beyond my control at this moment in time, because it was just stunning to watch this take place and watch this happen. And lots more. Sadly, the day came when it was time to leave. And living across there had been absolutely and utterly magical. It truly was extraordinary. There's nothing quite like it. And Don had to give some lectures in Bombay. And he was sponsored by a member of the Congress Party, who was the representative for an area of Bombay. And we went, and we were received like royalty. I'd never seen anything quite like it. We went to Pune, and Don talked in Pune, and there are pictures of us with huge things of flowers. And in Bombay there were dinners and galas, and we went up, and one of the most moving things for me was to go to the Tata Institute for Widows. And it's an institute for Parsi widows, and there were some very young women, and we went when they were doing all their cooking. And it was magnificent, because it was another layer of Barbara talking, sharing with me about the whole concept of cooking. And we flew back to Europe. I went one way, Don went the other, and got back and focused on what it was to do psychology. And so I did my Oxcam exams, because we didn't have GCEs and things like that in those days. And I also did university exams for the United States, because Don was never sure where he was going to be. And I got accepted in Cambridge, and I got accepted in Stanford University. And I did the exam back to back. I started at 8 o'clock in the morning and finished at 9 o'clock at night, and it was quite an experience. And got through that, and at that point, the Standard Oil of California decided to shut up their office and take Don back to the US. And 2 friends of mine from my show business days in Paris We lived on barges on the Seine. And this wonderful American couple, Hal and Mark and Audrey, had come, and when President Kennedy was elected, Kennedy asked him to go back and be in his kitchen cabinet. He was a brilliant mathematician, lovely family. And so it was decided I would go visit them and then come on to California, which is what I did. And while I was there, Hal took me to meet President Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy. And he asked him that if I stayed, would President Kennedy sign my authorization to be an alien resident in the United States. And I thought that was really, again at the time didn't think about it so much, but later on realized how powerful that was. And this is the way, for me, Baba works. That was the first big connection. Got to California, and of course, as it was always the case when something important was going on, Don was off in Scandinavia or somewhere. So I did my best to settle down. I have never been so alone. I have never been so homesick in all the places I've lived in the world as I was in California. It was dreadful, and I was very, very close to suicide. It was very difficult to adjust to. And right in the middle of the worst patch, I got a telegraph from Mani saying, Baba says, are you all right? I mean, totally and utterly extraordinary that I would get something like this. And so because you had to send a telegram back if you got a telegram from Baba. So I sent a telegram back saying, no, I'm not, I'm having a terrible state. And Baba had a thing that he used to do with me over the years, until just before he dropped the body. And if he wanted me to think on something, he would send me a message saying, do you love me? And that was my clue, that was what gave me the peace in the reality of life to know what to do and how to deal with it. And it really was an extraordinary peace that I was blessed with through my formative years and starting to be a psychologist. I was like a square peg in a round hole in the university, and luckily found San Francisco State University, which was just...
These will help.
What do I do, swallow them?
No, you can chew them.
Chew them, okay. And I cannot tell you how extraordinary it was. I managed to work with a man called Malinowski, whose wife was a very famous anthropologist. I managed to work with her. There was a professor there of psychology who had worked with Jung. There was a French philosophy professor. It just was unbelievable, and I got to use all my languages. I got to be a part of this very erudite, very amazing community. And I got educated, but educated in a way exactly as Baba had predicted. But at the time, you don't think about it, because when you're immersed in it, you're not thinking, this is what Baba said. And it's the reality afterwards that says, oh my God, I was sitting there. Baba said, this is what you should do. This is how you should do it. This is where... And that was what was happening. It was unbelievable. It was uncanny. And Don was very brave and very unique in that he neither stated nor denied our relationship. And let me see, I have been his adopted son, his nephew, an orphan. There are a few more, I can't remember them, but I've had various designations all the way through as to my relationship with Don, which is hysterically funny. And it was the one thing that was very difficult for Don and I, because it caused lots of traumas, because it was very difficult. I mean, he was a businessman, and you didn't go in and say, I've got a lover, I'm gay. Nowadays it wouldn't matter, but then it mattered. Got very involved with the Sufis, and when I was here, one of the things I said to Baba, stupid, naive, dumb. I said, Baba, Don is a follower of the Sufis, should I become a Sufi? And Baba looked at me as if he'd been struck by lightning and said, "Why would you become a Sufi? You're mine. You've come to me. I asked you here." And I thought, whoops, got that one clear, thank you. And he said, "But I want you to help Ivy. I love Ivy. And I want you to help her, and you will help her." And I thought, hold on a minute. What I know of Ivy, she's been studying spirituality for donkey's years. She studied under Rabia Martin. She's traveled the world. How am I going to help her? Well, I did. And Baba gave me these incredible pieces where I got to share, to show, and to deal with, in a whole variety of ways, the things that Baba had said to me really clearly here. So there's the pre-Baba, there's the Baba, and there's the post-Baba. And the one thing that is as extraordinary importance, I believe, for everybody who comes to Baba, is that once you give yourself to Baba, Baba is absolutely clear that he doesn't just go that extra mile, he goes 100 million lifetimes for you. And he really does. Because I've been put in situations, time and time again. Moshe Deuce used to joke, I mean, it was one of her big things with me. She said, you know, here's this young man, he's not an American, and he's met every president of the United States since he arrived here. And that was her big joke, and it was true. I don't know how it happened or why it happened, but it did. And working with her and watching her work with her Marids, and watching how Baba would communicate, would influence, would help her, would support her, was extraordinary. And then the Sufi order grew. Mani told me this story, and this is, I think, the piece where I'd like to stop because it's so powerful. I came to last Darshan, and Baba had said to me one day, when you come back, I want you to bring your puppets with me, and I want you to do a performance for me. And so I brought the remaining puppets with me, and we went to Guru Prasad. And Meherazad told me afterwards that Baba was in his chair smiling when I did the performance for him with the puppets. The puppets were left, they were given to Mani. And Baba had said to me one day, in a half-joking, half-serious way, "What is it you really want to do?" I'm sitting right there. And I looked at Baba and I said, "Baba, I would like to be here at your feet with my begging bowl." And he hit me on the head real hard. And when Baba hit you, it was hard. It wasn't a gentle touch. Very powerful. And he said, "If I wanted you here, you would be here. You are going to go do my work in the West. I've told you it's going to be very difficult. Go." And that was very, very clear. Mani told me, sitting on the porch in 1978, "Alain, Baba used to ask me for your letters, for your cards, because they made him laugh. They were special. And she told me the reason he never ever allowed you to come back before he dropped the body was because had you have come back and said to him one more time, 'I want to be here with you,' he loved you so much, he would have let you." Now, if that isn't the most extraordinary way to love another human being, to be able to say, "Go away because you've got stuff you've got to do, and I love you and I know you can do it," and to push me away, and to deprive, in a sense, both of us of the pleasure and the extraordinariness of knowing what it is to be with Baba. It was absolutely unbelievable. I have been through traumas, I have been through joys, I have been through extraordinarily difficult moments in my life, unbelievable. Baba has never, ever, ever let me down. In the worst of my nightmares, the very worst of my nightmares, Baba has always been there. Thank you for listening. I hope it has touched your hearts. It certainly has touched mine. This is such a joy. And I want to say one last little thing. Baba taught me, and I got this by osmosis, that, you know, sometimes you think to yourself, boy, it would be great to have hundreds of people here and listen to me talking about Baba, because Baba's so important and Baba's so exciting, and to hear the stories. And he got me to understand you could have 2 or 3 people in the room. Those 2 or 3 people are the creme de la creme. They are extraordinary. They have that wisdom. They have that ability. They will capture the word. They will take away the image with them. And that's what I believe each and every one of you will do today. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Now how about that for timing?
What's your name?
Alain
Alain?
Youell.
My name's Annika. I loved what you just said.
Thank you.
Beautiful.